everybody. Hi, hello. My name is Nana, and welcome to the 7th episode of Biz Chill. Today, we're talking about Sam Walton's Made in America, and we're covering Chapter 7. This chapter is called Taking the Company Public. I'm very excited to tell you about this one because I thought this one was interesting because I don't really ever get to hear or read many stories about taking companies public, which I hope to do and talk about in the future. If you haven't watched the last episode, I really recommend you do that. And yeah, settle down, grab a drink, let's get into it. So, we start off with Mr. Sam Walton talking about the first loan he took out. It was for an ice cream machine, and that was his first ever bank loan. This is the concept of leverage. Essentially, leverage in business is just borrowing money to grow a business. And he borrowed a lot of money from many local banks to build many new stores. But of course, growth often you need to have debt to grow your business, but it's also very risky. He does note many times throughout this chapter that he was not very comfortable with the risk, which it makes sense since he was born and raised in the Great Depression, so he must have had a hard time dealing with that. Mr. Sam Walton also encouraged many of his store managers and relatives to invest in each store. Of course, he probably just wanted some money into the store. But this also has kind of the concept of having skin in the game. Usually people try to work harder if they, have money in that, like they invested in it. So there's that. By the late 1960s, Mr. Sam Walton basically accumulated debt to practically every bank in Arkansas and southern Missouri. Now, if my memory serves me correctly, Missouri is a large state, like quite a large state. So, owing money to every bank in Missouri is quite the feat, and that's just Missouri, and he said basically every bank in Arkansas as well. So that's huge. At that point, he even bought a small bank to understand financing better, which he did say helped a lot. And by 1969, Walmart was a patchwork of 32 separate partnerships with heavy debts. In 1969, Mr. Sam Walton met a man named Mike Smith, who suggested going public. So going public like an IPO is, of course, selling shares to regular people and institutions. You raise money by selling part of the company via shares, of course. Mr. Sam Walton and his brother, Mr. Bud, realized profits weren't enough for growth and debt repayment both at once. And they debated the idea during a quail hunting trip and decided to seriously consider taking the company public. At that point, money was incredibly tight. The Republic Bank would not lend any more money. The First Commerce in New Orleans lends $1.5 million, but that's just a stopgap. So a stopgap is basically just a temporary way of dealing with a problem. I wasn't sure if a lot of people knew that word. Cause I certainly didn't. I just learned it like a few days ago. So I'm just gonna say that there. At that time, potential leaders like Prudential refused that did not believe in Walmart's model, but Mass Mutual agreed to loan $1 million, but demanded stock options, so rights to future shares if Walmart were to succeed. If I had to go more in depth into it, stock options are basically when investors get the option to buy shares at a preset price, betting on the company's future value. So if you see a company and you think, oh, that company is definitely going to be successful, then you'll want to get a stock option. Because if it's very successful in the future and the preset price was very low, you're gonna make a lot of money. Which I think is, while it's a great idea, uh, it's also very risky. I can't imagine if you invest into a company that you think is good, and then it ends up going downhill, and then those stock options are worthless. Anyways. In spring of 1970, Mr. Sam Walton decides to take Walmart public. He's very tired of borrowing at this point. He doesn't like the debt and makes him uncomfortable. And at that point, he asked investment banks such as White, Weld & Co. and Stefan Zink to help. Mr. Sam Walton's sons, Mr. Rob, consolidated the 32 partnerships into one company and began drafting the IPO plan because Mr. Rob is a lawyer. It's mentioned multiple times in the book. I believe he was the company's first lawyer. Um, In the mid 1970s, the plan was to sell 20% of the company, so that's roughly 300,000 shares, and they would be mostly family owned until then. Even now, the Walton family owns many, many company stock. Um, the latest I could find was 37%. And they used book value at the time for initial pricing rather than projections. Unfortunately, the stock market dropped. They had to delay the IPO. Um, but by October 1st in 1970, Walmart finally goes public, and the shares are offered at $15, sold at $16.5 each. At that time, there were only about 800 shareholders, and these shareholders were mainly institutions and people the Waltons knew. So it was a very small business, and it didn't attract a lot of attention at the time. At the time of writing this book, the Walton family had retained 61% of the shares, but paid off all their debts, and they haven't borrowed a dime personally since. I'd like to reiterate this was at the time of writing the book. I'm sure it's fluctuated by now. Those who invested in the IPO made huge returns over the decades thanks to the stock splits and price increases. There were some personal dislikes about making the company public though. For example, Mrs. Helen Walton really disliked the public scrutiny. She said that public companies are open books, so the financials and decisions are available to everyone. And as shown in many of the chapters beforehand, the Waltons really love their privacy. They would like to keep their personal life private. So I'm sure this was a tough step. But after they made the IPO, they started hosting annual shareholder meetings. Um, and they were very lively. They went rowing, they went camping. It's quite funny if you read the book. He also talks about coping with the analysts and investors. They did win some long-term supporters like Maggie Gilliam from the first Boston. But some of the analysts were quite critical and caused the stock prices to swing a lot. There was one lady that Mr. Sam Walton had talked with, and she went back and she tore the company to shreds in her article. While the company has many supporters, there are also as many critics. But from 1977 to 1987, at the time of the writing of the book, Walmart gave investors an average of 46% return a year. And even in like the bad times, so that's roughly 1991, over 32%. By 15 years after the IPO, Walmart's value had grown from $135 million to $1.5 billion. That is insane. Going from 1.5 million, from 135 million to 1.5 billion dollars is an absolutely crazy amount. That's like 11 times, I believe. So, I I think it's just a huge company. It's kind of like compound growth. I think if it's like they had a really good fundamental from the beginning, and so when they tried to grow it, it obviously turned out very well. So I don't think there's more story in this chapter. This chapter was very based on like numbers and like, ooh, how we took the company public. So there wasn't a lot to say. So please enjoy the shorter episode. I'm gonna be trying to make shorter episodes because I feel like that might be more convenient for you guys to listen to. So yeah, this was Biz Chill. I was your host, Nene, signing off. Bye bye!